Hi, it's James from Totally Wild UK here, and today we're going to take a look at something that for me is the essence of British summer. We find it in drinks, we find it in cordial, we find it in cocktails, we find it in mousse, meringue, cheesecakes, we find it in absolutely everything, and we will all be well versed in how this tastes because we try it in loads of things. It's right here, and it's called elderflower. The tree itself obviously is called elder, but this is the flower that's in bloom right now. So we're in the middle of June and there's this covering our hedgerows. Once it comes into flower, you see it absolutely everywhere. If we look at it from an ID point of view and a food point of view, it's probably best to start on the wood. So you'll see the wood in there is quite gnarled. It's yellow, yellowish green actually, and it's really cracked and broken apart. Sometimes the older branches, we've got a couple just in here, get really dry and break easily. But actually, if we were to leave this, it most likely would start to produce leaves eventually. Sometimes in winter it starts to look really dead, and then summer will start to come to life again. And we look at the leaves first. These are spear-shaped here, with a serrated edge, and typically we'll have either 5, like you can see here, or we'll have 7. So we always have 2 leaves opposite and 1 leaf at the end. And then we've got the flower. So this has just come into season now. Like I say, we're in the middle of June. Flowers are out, and we've got a plume of white to cream flowers grow on a flat face here on the end. These have a fantastic flavour. So if we're picking it, what we want to get is as little of the green as possible, and then the flower head. We can use these in absolutely loads of things. The first thing I always make every year is elderflower cordial and elderflower syrup. Really simple. I use 10 heads of elderflower per litre of liquid, and then I use equal amounts of liquid to sugar eventually. All I do for processing it is I grab it off, pop it in a pan, and boil it for 10 minutes, strain it out, and then add the sugar. The idea for me is just get it used as quick as possible instead of leaving it to steep for ages. There's a couple of different ways where you can steep it for much longer, but for me I want to get it in and out quick. So that's my syrup, and then for cordial I do the same but just add lemon juice. I always make a lot of those 2 things because those 2 things can lock in that flavour of elderflower, and we can use that in pretty much any other elderflower recipe. So we can use those for making ice lollies, we can use those for making sorbets, we can use those for making ice cream, we can use those in cheesecakes. We can literally use that syrup or that cordial in loads of other recipes. You can also make fritters, which is a really nice quick way. So you make a tempeh, a batter mix. I like to put a little bit of the elderflower syrup in there as well so it tastes a bit stronger. You dip the head in it and then fry it off. Just like, you know, a shallow fry, just a light fry. Get it nice and crispy, and then you can munch it on there. That's quite nice. And then later in the year, these flower heads will all fall off, and we'll start to get the first beginnings of elderberries. At that point, they'll be green, and then we can use them then, pulling them off green before they turn into a berry, as a substitute for a caper. So what I usually do is get a fork, and I'll run my fork through them, and it'll drop off all the berries, and then I'll make up a pickling liquor. I usually use 1 part water, 1 part apple cider vinegar, and ½ part sugar, a little bit of salt, and that's my standard pickling vinegar for anything. And all I'd do is in a jar, I'd heat up the pickling vinegar first, and then pour it over those green immature berries, and then that would make like a caper, a version of a caper, which is quite nice. You can do that all the way up till they're a little bit softer as well, and then it just becomes more of a berry version caper, which is really nice. The reason we're pouring it on hot, that's quite important. So we're pouring the pickling liquor over hot because any green part of this plant is classed as mildly toxic. So once we pour it over, it breaks down the toxins and we can use it then. And then later in the year, in fact this one's starting to go to berry, the flowers have fallen off this one here, and it's just starting to go to this green immature berry. Later in the year, those immature green berries will turn into real berries, ripe berries, and you always know they're ready to pick. Because at the moment with the flower, all of these heads are pointing upwards, and when we come into berry, they'll start to droop and dangle, and when they're just ready and perfect, they'll start to droop facing downwards. We'll chop them off again, and we can use the berries for loads of things. So I always think the flower really suits sweet dishes, whereas the berry suits more savoury dishes. We can make stuff like Pontac sauce, which is the berries mixed with a balsamic, which is really good. Anything you'd use balsamic for, or a balsamic glaze, works really well. At that point, I like to serve it with duck, so I make an elderberry kind of thick, syrupy Pontac sauce and serve that with a duck glaze, which is really nice. Or just a substitute for balsamic in loads of things. Really nice in stews. You can just chuck the berries into the stew about 5 minutes before you serve it, and the juice will come out and add to for the sauce. You can use it in a quick port, so if you buy a bottle of port, and then the cheapest way is to chuck the berries in upside down and pop the lid back on so they have time to macerate and the juice can come out into the port. Or you could ferment the berries yourself into a wine. So you take them off, juice them, add sugar, and then ferment it with a bit of yeast. Whilst we're on wine, actually, the elderflowers make a really, really, really good champagne. So all I do for the champagne is I use 1 head per litre, so very little from what you'd imagine. So 1 head per litre, boil it for 10 minutes, strain it off. For each 5 litres of liquid, I use 1 kilogram of sugar, 1 sachet of champagne yeast, put a cloth over it, leave it for 7 days, and then chuck it into a plastic bottle and let it ferment, and it'll start to carbonate itself in the bottle. It's key that you put it in a plastic bottle though, so you do not want to put it in glass because it carbonates, it becomes pressurised, and if it was in glass, it'd potentially explode. Whereas in plastic, you can see it starting to stretch a little bit, so you can see that gas is building up in there, and when it's ready, another 5 days maybe, and it's straight good to go like that. Very, very nice. So that's the berries, the fruit, the flowers, the leaves of elderflower. And we were talking about the actual wood a little bit earlier. So 99% of the time, not on every tree, but you can sometimes find something called jelly ear mushrooms growing off the wood of elder. I always say this and then I'll walk a bit further down and find it growing on ash, but you do more often than not find the jelly ear mushroom growing with elder. So when you're out picking the flowers or picking the berries, it's worth taking a look a little bit further in to the wood and seeing if there's any of these jelly ear mushrooms, which we'll do a completely separate video on. But that's it, we've got elderflower in bloom now in June. Berries will be in season around September time, but a fantastic edible plant.